Memphis, Tennessee, March 7, 1995. The pediatric oncology ward on the fourth floor of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital smelled the way all hospital floors smell, antiseptic and recycled air, and something underneath both of those things that had no clinical name. The hallway was painted in colors someone had chosen to be cheerful: pale yellow, a soft green border along the bottom of the wall. Crayon drawings were taped at child height between the room doors. A paper butterfly mobile turned slowly near the nurse's station, in the draft from the ventilation system. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early March, and the light coming through the hallway windows was the thin, provisional light of late winter, present but not yet committed to anything. A cart squeaked somewhere. A monitor beeped in a steady, patient rhythm behind a closed door. The ward had its own particular quiet, the kind that sits just beneath the surface of the ordinary sounds, heavier than silence because of everything it contains. Room 412 had a drawing on the door. A girl had made it, a blue guitar with a sun behind it, the sun with a face, the guitar with strings that went all the way to the edges of the paper. Below it, in large, careful letters that had been worked over several times, Grace's room. Knock, please. Inside, the room held a hospital bed, a chair where someone had left an impression of long sitting, a windowsill with 3 get-well cards and a small stuffed rabbit, and a 9-year-old girl named Grace Ellen Totham who weighed 61 pounds and had been in this hospital for 11 weeks. Grace had leukemia. She had been diagnosed the previous October, just after her 9th birthday, and the weeks since had been the kind of weeks that rewrite a family. Her mother, Diane, had not slept more than 4 consecutive hours since November. Her father had taken indefinite leave from his job at the printing company in Germantown. They had a routine now: Diane days, her father evenings, both of them on the phone with each other constantly in between. They had learned the names of every nurse on every shift. They had learned what the numbers on the monitors meant. They had learned to read the doctors' faces in the hallway before the doctors said anything. Grace herself had learned something different. She had learned that time in a hospital room moves in a way that has nothing to do with clocks, that some hours are very long and some days are very short, that the ceiling above her bed had a water stain in the upper left corner that looked like a running dog if you turned your head slightly. And that music, real music, not the tinny stuff that came out of the small television mounted to the wall, made the long hours feel less like weight and more like water. She had told her mother this in December. "I want to hear real blues, Mama, not the radio kind, the real kind where you can hear the person's hands." Diane had bought a CD player and 4 albums. It helped. But Grace had been specific about something. "I want to hear it in the room, not from a machine, a real person playing." Diane had asked the hospital's music therapy coordinator. The coordinator had a volunteer guitarist who came on Thursdays. He played folk songs and children's music, kind, well-intentioned, nothing like what Grace meant. Grace had listened politely and thanked him, and when he left she had looked at the ceiling and found the running dog again and said nothing. It was this that Diane was thinking about on Tuesday afternoon, March 7th, when she stepped out to the hallway to refill her coffee cup. She was thinking about it in the exhausted, circular way that parents in hospitals think about the things they cannot fix, not with hope of solving, just with the particular love that keeps returning to what it cannot change. She was at the end of the hallway, near the elevator bank, when the elevator opened. The man who stepped out was large, broad-shouldered, heavyset, with short-cropped gray hair and a round, warm face that looked slightly tired in the way of someone who has recently had blood drawn. He wore a deep royal blue jacquard-patterned silk shirt, a brocade of subtle gold running through it, dark trousers, good shoes. He was carrying a black guitar case. He had a visitor badge clipped to his shirt pocket, slightly crooked, the way visitor badges always sit when you put them on yourself in a hurry. He stepped out of the elevator and stopped, looking at the hallway sign to orient himself. His cardiologist's office was on the 3rd floor. He had come up 1 floor by mistake, pressed the wrong button while reading something. He looked at the pediatric oncology sign and then at the elevator button and was about to turn back when he heard something. At the nurse's station, a woman was speaking quietly with one of the charge nurses. The large man couldn't hear the words, but he heard the texture of the voice, the particular flatness that comes into a voice after weeks of holding itself very carefully together. He looked at the woman. She had her coffee cup in both hands and her eyes were slightly reddened, and she was nodding at whatever the nurse was saying with the automatic nod of someone who has run out of responses but is still trying. He almost got back in the elevator. He pressed the button and waited. He looked at the paper butterfly mobile turning slowly in the draft from the ventilation system. He looked at the crayon drawings taped at child height along the wall. He looked at the names on the doors, names written in the handwriting of the children behind them, or the parents, each one its own particular universe of hope and waiting. The elevator didn't come. He stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then he walked to the nurse's station. The charge nurse looked up first. Her name was Patricia, and she had been on this ward for 14 years, and she recognized faces the way anyone does who has spent 14 years paying close attention to them. Her expression moved through surprise and then settled into something more careful. The woman with the coffee cup, Diane, turned. "Excuse me," the large man said. His voice was low and warm, unhurried. He was looking at Diane, not the nurse. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I got off on the wrong floor." He paused. "I couldn't help but notice." He didn't specify what he had noticed. He didn't need to. "Is someone in your family here?" Diane looked at him for a moment. In 11 weeks she had become very good at knowing who was worth talking to and who wasn't, and something about this man's face, the patience in it, the absence of performance, passed whatever test she had developed. "My daughter," she said. "Grace. She's 9. He nodded slowly. "How long?" 11 weeks. She looked at her coffee cup. "Leukemia." The large man was quiet for a moment. He looked at the hallway of closed doors, the crayon drawings taped at child height, the paper butterfly turning in the draft. "Your daughter," he said. "What is she like?" The question surprised Diane. People in hospitals asked how Grace was doing, what the prognosis was, whether she was eating. Nobody asked what she liked. "Music," she said, and then, because the specificity of it was still fresh, "Blues, real blues." She said she wants to hear it played by a real person where you can hear the hands. The large man looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the guitar case in his hand. Then he looked at Patricia behind the nurse's station. "What room?" he said. Patricia opened her mouth. She had policies to cite, visiting hours to enforce, infection protocols to reference. She knew all of them. She had enforced all of them many times for good reasons. She looked at the man in the royal blue shirt. She looked at the guitar case. She looked at Diane. 412, she said. Dr. Alan Mercer was the attending physician on the 4th floor that afternoon. He was 38 years old, thorough and competent, and he was coming out of room 409 when he heard something that stopped him in the hallway. It was coming from 412. He stood in the corridor and listened for a moment. Then he walked to the door. It was closed. Through it, audible but muffled, came a sound that he had no clinical category for: a guitar being played slowly, with a particular kind of trembling in the sustained notes, warm and human and reaching. He raised his hand to knock. Patricia appeared at his elbow. He looked at her. She shook her head once very slightly. He lowered his hand. They stood together in the corridor outside room 412, and neither of them said anything. And after a moment, a second nurse came and stood beside them for the same reason. And then an orderly who had been pushing a cart stopped the cart and stood. The door to the room across the hall opened, and a 10-year-old boy in a hospital gown looked out, head tilted. He had an IV line running to his left arm. He looked at the adults standing in the hallway. He looked at room 412. He leaned against the door frame and listened. Inside room 412, B.B. King sat in the chair beside Grace's bed. He had pulled it close, the way you pull a chair close when you want someone to know you are not in a hurry. Grace was sitting up against her pillows, small and thin, her head covered by a soft blue cap that Diane had knitted. She had the stuffed rabbit in her lap. She had looked at the large man in the blue shirt when he came in, and at the guitar case, and she had said nothing for a moment. Just looked at the case with the particular attention of someone who has been waiting for something, without knowing exactly what form it would take. He had introduced himself. She had looked at him carefully. "Are you really him?" she said. "Last time I checked," he said. She had considered this. "My mama has your record," she said, "the one with the red cover." "Live at the Regal," he said. "1964, good record." "The guitar sounds different on it," she said, "like it's talking." "That's the idea," he said. He had taken Lucille out of the case then, the pitch-black Gibson ES 355, its gold hardware catching the fluorescent light of the hospital room, and settled it across his lap. And Grace had watched the guitar the way she had watched very few things in her 9 years, with absolute stillness and the particular intensity of someone who has been waiting without knowing exactly what they were waiting for. Her eyes moved to his hands, the hands with the calluses. The large left hand with its vibrato that she would not yet have had a word for, where you can hear the hands. He played quietly. The volume turned not by a knob but by pressure and angle, the way you can make a voice fill a room or stay between two people depending on how you choose to carry it. He played a slow blues, nothing with a title, nothing she would know, just the 12-bar form that is as old as the delta itself, and as new as whatever feeling is being put into it in any given moment. He watched her face while he played. She was listening the way children listen when they are listening for real, not politely, not performatively, but with every part of her attention gathered into one place. Her hands had gone still on the stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were on his left hand, the vibrato, the way a note bent upward and then breathed. After 2 verses he stopped, not because the music was done, but because he was asking her something. "What do you want to hear?" he said. She thought about it seriously. "Something sad," she said, "but not too sad, something that knows it's going to be okay even when it doesn't feel like it." He looked at her for a moment. 9 years old, 61 pounds, 11 weeks in this room, and she had just given him the most precise description of the blues he had heard in years. He played "Every Day I Have the Blues," slow and quiet, the way it sounds at the end of a long day rather than the beginning of a set. He played it through twice, and the second time through he left more space in it, let the notes breathe longer, let the silences say their part. When he finished, Grace was quiet for a moment. "That's it," she said. "That's the sound." He nodded. "Your mama told me you drew that," he said, nodding toward the door where her guitar and son drawing was taped. Grace looked at the door. "I wanted to remember what a guitar looks like," she said, "so when I get out I can learn." He looked at her. "When you get out," he said, not if, when. He had heard the word she chose and he chose it back. "When I get out," she confirmed. She pulled the stuffed rabbit slightly closer. "Do you think I could learn?" "I think," he said, "that you already know what matters. The rest is just where to put your fingers." He played one more song, a slow, quiet thing that moved like water over stones, unhurried, finding its way. Diane sat in the corner of the room and did not try to stop what was happening in her face. She had run out of the energy that stopping things requires. 40 minutes after he had walked through the door of room 412 by mistake, B.B. King set Lucille back in her case and closed the latches. He stood. He looked at Grace. "You practice," he said. "I will," she said. He reached into his shirt pocket and took out a pick, his own, worn at the edges, custom-made, with the particular weight that 40 years of use had made familiar. He held it out to Grace. She took it with both hands. She turned it over once, looking at it carefully, the way she had looked at his hands. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. He picked up the case, nodded to Diane and walked to the door. He opened it. In the corridor outside, 4 hospital staff and 1 boy in a hospital gown with an IV line were standing in a loose cluster. Nobody had been pretending to do anything else for the last 40 minutes. They looked at the large man in the royal blue shirt as he came out. Nobody said anything. He nodded at them, at the boy especially, and walked back toward the elevator. Dr. Mercer cleared his throat. He looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at her clipboard. The boy with the IV line looked at room 412, then at the retreating blue shirt, then shuffled back into his room across the hall, pulling his IV stand behind him. The elevator came. The large man stepped in. The doors closed. In room 412, Grace was still holding the pick. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at her drawing on the door, the blue guitar with the sun behind it. Then she looked at her mother. "Mama," she said, "when I get out, I want to learn for real." Diane looked at her daughter. She looked at the pick in Grace's small hand. She looked at the drawing on the door. "Okay," she said. Her voice was very steady. "When you get out." 17 years later, in the summer of 2012, a young woman named Grace Totham played a Tuesday night residency at a small club on Beale Street in Memphis. She was 26 years old and had been playing guitar since she was 11, the year after she left the hospital. She played blues, real blues. She always said, the kind where you can hear the hands, and she had been playing this particular club for 2 years, and the room was usually about half full, and she was fine with that. That Tuesday in July, the room was 3/4 full by 9 o'clock, which was unusual for a Tuesday. By 9:30 it was full. She played her first set without looking at the crowd much, the way she always played, eyes on the guitar, on the hands, on the place where the note was going. She had learned to play that way from watching someone else do it, 17 years ago, in a room with a stuffed rabbit and a drawing on the door. She didn't know why the room was full until after the first set, when a large man in a royal blue jacquard patterned shirt came to the edge of the stage, and she looked up from unstrapping her guitar. She recognized him before he said anything. She had been 9 years old and 61 pounds in a hospital room with a stuffed rabbit and a drawing on the door, and she had not forgotten a single detail of the 40 minutes that had changed the direction of her life. He looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled, the wide, warm, crinkle-eyed smile. "You practice," he said. "I did," she said. She reached into her shirt pocket and held something out to him across the edge of the stage. A guitar pick. Worn at the edges now, the custom weight of it familiar in a different way than it had been when she was 9. Familiar the way a thing gets when it has been carried for 17 years and held before every performance and never once left behind. He looked at it in her hand. He shook his head. "You keep that," he said. "You earned it." She held it to her chest for a moment, the way you hold something you have been carrying a long time. Then she turned back to the microphone, settled the guitar across her hip, and played the second set. If you have ever had a piece of music reach you when you needed it most, not from a radio, not from a playlist, but from a real person in a real room, drop it in the comments. I read every one. And which B.B. King song do you keep coming back to? The beautiful thing about the blues is that when you're playing it, you're never alone. B.B. King.